UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson in intensive care, and Americans brace for what some officials are saying could be the hottest and saddest week of their lives. Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. According to number 10 Downing Street, the British leader was moved to the ICU after his symptoms from coronavirus worsened. CGTN's Ollie Barrett brings us the latest from London.
Downing Street confirming that news, which shocked the British public, that their Prime Minister was needing to be moved into the intensive care unit at St Thomas's Hospital here in London, the British capital, because his condition had worsened enough to merit that move into ICU. Downing Street sources telling us that Boris Johnson has not immediately needed to be put on a ventilator, but we do understand that through the course of the day, Boris Johnson has at times needed to be given a supply of oxygen to help him with his breathing. Dominic Raab, the current UK Foreign Secretary, he effectively moves into that de facto prime ministerial role. He will be running the government as and when he needs to, with Boris Johnson clearly at times going to be incapacitated by his treatment in the ICU. Very difficult hours to come for the Prime Minister, also for his fiancée, Carrie Simons, who is pregnant with their child and from whom she has been isolated because of his suffering with COVID-19 symptoms. Difficult days for Boris Johnson, difficult days for the UK government, very worrying days for the British people.
That was Ollie Barrett reporting from London. Well, that news comes as the number of coronavirus cases continues to skyrocket around the world. Here in the United States, the death toll is well over 10,000. Amid all the grim figures, there are some bright spots, including stories of survivors. Jim Santilli contracted coronavirus last month and has since recovered. He joins us via Skype from Macomb County in Michigan. And from Los Angeles via Skype, Dr. Gary Richwald is a communicable and infectious diseases expert. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Dr. Gary Richwald, let me start with you. U.S. officials are telling us that the next week, starting today, or the next 2 or 3 weeks, could be, in their words, the hottest and saddest of most Americans' lives. What can we expect in the upcoming weeks?
I think the number one issue is we're going to have more and more people hospitalized who are very ill, and as happened to many of the patients that I'm involved with, people go from being asymptomatic to within 3 to 12 hours to being critically ill and needing hospital admission. This type of pressure on the healthcare system is really unprecedented. Normally, we have people who have heart attacks or strokes, and they get very urgent care and attention. This is a situation where young adults of all ages in large numbers are going to be experiencing more severe illness and needing very rapid attention.
Dr. Richwald, you are in California right now, in Los Angeles. That is a very popular state. Of course, Los Angeles is a very popular city. What is the situation there?
Well, it's like the calm before the storm. What's really going on is we have capacity built up because we discharged all the patients that don't have emergencies, non-COVID emergencies, and we're just waiting to see the onslaught of admissions of patients needing evaluation, some requiring ventilation and immediate intubation. So I think the best way to describe this is, as one of my colleagues said, there's an eerie silence, and we expect to have a situation perhaps not as severe as New York, but it's very hard to predict. And, so people are on edge waiting for this to happen. Clinicians like to do things, and it's hard waiting for this to happen.
All right, let's bring Jim into the conversation. Jim, you are a recovering COVID-19 patient. Tell us about your experience. What were the first symptoms and what did you go through?
Yeah, so really on March 18th, I started having a sudden onset of both severe respiratory and cardiac issues. So on the respiratory side, I started having difficulty breathing. I had some wheezing. I also had some coughing taking place. The cardiac side, which is really what brought me into the emergency room in the first place, my heart rate was in the 160s. My blood pressure was extremely high. So I went to Henry Ford Macomb Hospital in Clinton Township. Immediately, they suspected COVID-19, so they ran a test. The problem was I didn't receive the test results for 4 days. And one of the things is really that people need to understand are the doctor's hands are essentially tied without having those test results. Reason being is, let's just say I didn't have COVID-19 and I was in the hospital, I had airway inflammation. Well, oftentimes they're going to use high doses of steroids to reduce that inflammation. So in my case, I was kind of in a holding pattern for a number of days. They had me on a lower dose of steroids. They also had me on an albuterol inhaler. However, my breathing continued to get worse day by day. On Saturday, March 21st, that was the worst of the days. I was having extreme difficulty breathing, gasping for air. I felt like I was slowly drowning. And I remember at one point just thinking to myself, am I going to live to see midnight or the next day? And the physician came in that morning. He had mentioned that they've exhausted all treatment options at that point. And the x-ray that they took that morning showed a variety of structural issues going on, including some collapsing within the lungs. So he recommended bringing an infectious disease physician in. That physician arrived shortly after, and he was the one that recommended the hydroxychloroquine and the azithromycin. He stated at that point that they saw a lot of positive results in both China and South Korea. I did try it a few hours later, and it was kind of incredible because within a few hours after taking that medication, the gasping for air stopped and my vitals began improving, and it was almost a complete 180-degree turn. The following day brought some improvement, and then Monday, which was the 23rd, I had a significant improvement, and by Tuesday, the 24th, I was actually miraculously able to go home.
Dr. Richwell, listening to Jim there tell us about the treatment that he was given, which is hydroxychloroquine as well as azithromycin. It's a controversial drug treatment. We've heard lots about it. In fact, it was a source of heated debates in the Trump administration, we understand, between officials. This is what the president had to say about it. Let's listen.
If it works, that'd be great. If it doesn't work, we know for many years, malaria, it's incredible what it's done for malaria. It's incredible what it's done for lupus, but it doesn't kill people. That's one of the things with a vaccine. When we have a vaccine, we have to do tests because when you inject that vaccine, when they take whatever it is they have to take, we have to make sure it doesn't have a horrible impact, destroy somebody. It could. So we have to test it for a long period of time. This one, not so much because it's been out there. Now, I'm not acting as a doctor. I'm saying do what you want, but there are some good signs.
So, Dr. Richwell, there we heard from Jim telling us that this was a combination of drugs that worked for him, but we're also hearing from other doctors, from scientists as well, that there's a lot of dangers in using this drug, that there are reasons to be concerned about it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, the President of the United States, no matter what you think about him on a personal and political level, should not be promoting treatments. We have a large official medical and public health establishment. We especially have not heard from the public health establishment, I'll note. And that there's no way that a drug that came into the marketplace of COVID-19, there's no way that we can be sure that this drug works. I agree with the president that it may be a relatively low-risk drug, but there are many patients who have cardiac problems and other problems who should not be taking this drug. And you know, there's a difference between humanitarian use, which means, well, we have nothing else to do, which was not the case. In this, Jim was receiving intensive care from an excellent hospital in southern Michigan. That's the reason he's alive today, not because of hydroquinone, any of the quinine-type compounds. That's my professional opinion. It may turn out that if you have the right timing and at the right point, because clearly Jim had a very high viral load at this point. As he was saying, he was feeling like this was, and the doctors had told him that he was very, very ill. He had that discussion with his wife and etc. But, you know, we just don't know whether or not this drug worked. I'm not suggesting never using it,
Right.
but I'm suggesting we need a different approach in this country in terms of how we communicate important medical and public health information.
Jim, have you taken any steps to ensure that you are now immune? Can you be absolutely sure that you cannot be reinfected?
Well, right now I've actually been isolated since being released from the hospital, just as more of a precautionary period. Obviously, once I'm out of isolation within my home, you know, as far as being in a confined room, I'm going to remain isolated within the house. So, you know, I think, you know, and maybe the doctor could better answer the question, but from what I understand, they're saying if you have the antibodies in your system, you're supposedly not able to catch it again within a 12 to 18 month period.
Dr. Richwald, what do we know about that? If you have the antibodies in your system, are you effectively immune?
We don't know the answer to that question. I think what Jim said is right on. We don't know. Jim took the conservative and appropriate approach and self-isolated himself after he left the hospital. But Jim's case, and I'm here going to include it in 3 or 4 problems in terms of how he was managed both before he was hospitalized and after, point out some of the severe shortcomings in how this epidemic should be managed. And what I'm going to say, if we have time, you know, is really public health 101. Here's the most interesting points about Jim's care. He and I spoke for about an hour yesterday. It turns out that in mid-January, he was in Washington, D.C. with other transportation experts. Not only did they meet, you know, side by side, but they were also met with members of the Congress, the senators, and their staff, House of Representatives, etc. Then he came back to Michigan, and as an executive, he met with the Michigan Police Department heads. So here he had 2 extremely significant exposures, and yet he was never offered a test. He became sick in early February. This did not begin in March. My understanding of his case is he became ill in February with a respiratory illness, for which he was given antibiotics and steroids. That was followed by recovery, and then he had a what we call biphasic illness that he then became very sick.
Okay, Jim, one final question. We don't have much time. As you told us, you're still in isolation. You are recovering. You're not recovered. What happens next?
Really, I've actually, to be honest, I've been already cleared to get out of isolation. I just chose to remain in here just as a precaution for the safety of my wife, because I do have a minor occasional cough. It's actually a lot better today, but just because I have that cough, which they said is likely from the irritation of the airways, I just want to be safe.
Okay.
Because again, COVID-19, it's a very serious matter. You know, people should not take it as a joke. It can come on quickly. It can hit you hard. And we need to all do what we can to make sure that we're stopping the spread.
Jim Santilli, Dr. Gary Richwald, thanks to both of you for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, the Trump administration has come under criticism for the way it has responded to the pandemic. To discuss that and more, we're joined now by Amicia Cross here in Washington. She is a Democratic strategist and political analyst. And joining us from New York via Skype, John Burnett is managing director and founder of the One Empire Group. Welcome to both of you. First, let me get your responses to the news that's come out of London a few hours ago, and that is the British Prime Minister Boris Johnson taken to the intensive care unit at a hospital in the city there after his condition worsened. John, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, we're talking about someone who would have access to the best treatment and the best tests that we could find.
First off, I'm quite sure I join the world in wishing the best for the Prime Minister. But it also shows that no one is what do you call it, naturally immune to this disease. It could actually reach our elite as well as the working class individuals among us all over the globe. So again, our hearts and prayers go out to Boris Johnson.
Amisha, as John just pointed out there, this is a virus that infects elites as well as the working class. It speaks to the fact that the virus knows no boundaries. It doesn't matter how powerful you are, how wealthy you are, what your race is. And yet we look at the United States and we see President Trump, who is not even taking the warnings of his own coronavirus team to wear a mask. He's not wearing a mask, and we see that. Social distancing not being practiced. We see those news conferences every day with a whole cluster of people behind a microphone at the White House. Could this perhaps be a wake-up call?
Absolutely. And to echo my Republican counterparts' sentiments here, I think that thoughts and prayers as well as safe energies and blessings and mercies go out to the Prime Minister, because this is a very serious illness and condition that he's battling. Here in the United States, I think that hearing that news and recognizing that this could happen to anyone at any throng of society should impact President Trump and how he goes about understanding the coronavirus and how he actually plans for his own safety. But knowing this president, probably won't.
John, what do you think? Is this president taking life a bit too easy? I mean, shouldn't he be really setting the example for the rest of the country?
Well, the thing is that when you look, I look at the news every day, and this disease is impacting the entire globe. But it's also really has a huge impact on the G7, highly industrialized nations. And when I look at these leaders come on air, give their presentation to their nation, they're not wearing a mask. So I think it's really political play. I respect my fellow panelists, but she's playing politics. As far as having the president come on the stage, a podium, in a mask, that's ridiculous. We should focus on the information and the great things that this president is doing. In fact, Governor Cuomo just said today, he thanked the president as far as the U.S. comfort, converting it from non-COVID to COVID patients and all the other things that the president is doing. We need to put politics aside. And why? Because we are one America, and this president is stepping up.
How about that, Amisha? Need to put politics aside and listen to what the president is telling us.
The first person who needs to put politics aside is President Trump. This is the president who basically said that he is going to help those states of people with leaders that have actually said nice things about him. People who play nice with Donald Trump, people who have stoked his ego are going to be the people who receive ventilators first. This is the president who comes out and still every single time he does a press conference attacks the media. This is a president who for weeks said that the whole coronavirus was a Democratic created hoax. This is a president who didn't believe that we should have our social distancing or close down businesses at all. His assumption was that all things would be great by Easter. Now, granted, he has had to backtrack several of those things, but that has come specifically because all of his ideas for the past few weeks have fallen flat on their face. We're seeing a president who cares more about his campaigning, which he does every single day when he is in front of the camera for those press briefings. Someone who cares more about what's going to happen in Florida, not because he cares about the people of Florida, but because he cares about the votes in the state of Florida. This is a president who has played politics day in and day out. So with much respect to my Republican counterpart here, the first person who needs to stop playing partisan politics is the president of the United States.
John, I want to move away from politics myself. Of course, the big challenge right now is to defeat the coronavirus that is sweeping the world, but there's also another crisis. That's an economic crisis. We had those figures that came out last week, 6.6 million jobs lost. That's added to the 3.3 million we heard earlier than that. 10 million jobs gone. Is the economic pain going to get a lot worse before we see any kind of recovery at all?
Well, I think the economic climate will actually get probably worse for not just the U.S., but the G7 countries and less developed nations. We've heard reports that China, in and of itself, after telling us that they are actually in the clear with respect to COVID, they are seeing a small spike, right? So there's a lot of information that's coming in, updates. So not only the White House, but governors and other nations are constantly changing in terms of not having faulty projections, but new information coming in. But when you look at this economy, there's no nation that can shut down their economy for extended periods of time and then accumulate a lot of debt and not have an impact. However, we have great reports coming in. The president has stepped up. Many other leaders around the world are stepping in, helping the working class and helping the small businesses and the big corporations with mandates requiring them not to lay off. So this president is looking at situations saying that, you know what, how can we balance? We have to focus on the people first, getting them what they need to make sure that we can get through this before, during, and after the peak, and at the same time, help them with their livelihoods and their businesses. So that way, after this is over, we can get this economy up and running again and do lessons learned. So that way, not only the United States is better prepared, but the entire globe is.
John, there was a time when the president was thinking of reopening the economy by Easter. He felt that the country would be fine to reopen the economy at that time, but he was persuaded to extend that to the end of the month, to April 30th. But if we look at the rate of infection right now, and as we've just been told by officials in the coronavirus group at the White House, that the worst is yet to come. The worst could be the next 3 weeks. Realistically, can we see the economy reopen by the end of this month?
I don't think so. I think, again, when you hear the pundits on all the networks, not just the right, but also the far left, if you notice, the narrative has been changing every week, not based upon deception, not based upon false projections, but based upon new information that's coming in real time, based upon what's happening locally and trends that have already occurred and still ongoing with respect to other nations. So the president initially set a goal in terms of Easter, but given new information, just like Governor Cuomo and Governor Newsom, they're constantly adjusting. That's what modeling is. Just like in the financial world, information is put in, but when new information comes, you have to change the model and look at the data, and that's what the president is doing. We're hoping that now, mid-year, we could be past the peak to the point where we could actually reopen up markets.
So when you say mid-year, you're talking about what, June, July?
It could be. It could be.
Okay, Amisha, President Trump has been blamed for much of what has gone wrong in the manner in which this fight against the coronavirus has been taking place. But shouldn't some of that blame also go to governors? People like Andrew Cuomo, we noticed that in New York, it has the highest infection rate, it has the highest death rate. Did he wait too long to act?
I think that there are some examples of governors across the country who probably could have done more. And there are some examples of governors who stood out. And I will give a shout out here to Republican Governor Mike DeWine. Mike DeWine, even though he did not have any authority from the president in terms of the president stepping out at the time that DeWine was starting to get his state ready for coronavirus, President Trump was still going around telling everybody it was a Democratic hoax and that it would be over in a few weeks and that we'd all be back to normal. So I do think that there is something to be said about leadership at the state level, taking some of their cues from the president early on, who said that this was contained, who said it was not a big deal, who said that we weren't really going to see anything that looked any bit like China here in the United States. And I think that as we've seen, in administration after administration, leadership comes from the top. There was an expectation that if something was that emergent, that President Trump would have given some guidance to the states.
John, we talked earlier on about that jobless number, 10 million people. That's causing a lot of fear and anxiety around the country. There's been a bailout package, which was passed by Congress, signed by the president, $2 trillion. But there's already talk now of another bailout package because that first one's not going to be enough. How urgent is another stimulus package?
I'm glad that they're actually working on the next stimulus package before the previous one runs out. That's good management. Hopefully politics doesn't get in the way because, there's a lot of states with budget shortfalls, New York included, right? So they may not be, because they're spending a lot of resources fighting the COVID-19 in real time. So states like New York and even our smaller states across the board, governments as well as the working class and our industries need an ongoing package in different phases until we can actually get through this. And I appreciate the leadership by President Trump and many of our governors. This is no time to play the blame game. This is no time to play politics.
You know, very quickly, John, there have been accusations that the government has not done enough for small businesses. They've done a lot for big corporations, but not for small businesses. Do you agree?
I think the first package was approximately $377 billion. That's unprecedented. And like you had mentioned, based upon your question, there is another package that's being discussed, not just for big corporations, but mostly for small businesses. Why? Because small business is the biggest employer in our nation. So this is going to be looked at in phases rather.
Amisha, how do you see the economic challenges being how will that be resolved in the months ahead?
Well, I think that a lot of that is going to fall on state leadership as well. My home state of Illinois is projected to lose over 200,000 jobs by June. We have California doubling that by June. And there's, from the East Coast to the West Coast, Middle America, everyone is going to feel the pain here. What this situation has done is showcase that Trump was basically gambling on an economy that was not stable. The majority of people who are falling out in this industry were in hospitality. They were individuals who were in retail. These were groups that were on the brink to begin with, and this has further pushed them into extinction. The small gig economy that has been persistent in not being able to provide health insurance coverage and all of these other things that we see individuals demanding today, that wasn't going to happen. And I think that what we have seen now is an industry that is bust wide open, and it is forcing America to take notice of those individuals and those industries that were, in fact, being crippled already.
Amisha, very quickly, I've only got 30 seconds.
You know, I can't let that go on. That's a false narrative. This economy was strong. This is a black swan event. It
was strong for big business. Yes, it was strong for big business. It was strong for crony capitalism. It was strong for President Trump's partners. Yes.
The working class, the lowest unemployment across various demographics. That is a false narrative.
The gig economy where you're working 2 and 3 jobs on part-time wages is not something that is sustainable.
I am not going to be able to get that question in. I'm going to have to leave it there. We've run out of time. Thanks to both of you for being with us.
Leave it on a positive note.
That's it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.